Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to all of you. So great to see some people in from last week's webinar as well. It's so great to have you here. This is the second webinar for the Young Pacific Leaders Small Grants Program. If at any point you get disconnected or can't hear or can't see, go ahead and reach out to us either via the email or in the chat. For all those on the webinar, the chat is the easiest way to get a hold of us in the moment. So yeah, just let us know if you can't hear or you can't see anything. The chat box is also a great place to ask questions. We'll do a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, but as you go along, if you think of a question and you want to send it through, I'll be sure to address that at the end of the webinar. So I recognize most of you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Phoebe Hybeck, and I'm a Program Development Officer on the Program Development team at Cultural Vistas. For those of you who've not worked with Cultural Vistas previously, we are a nonprofit international exchange organization and the implementing partner for the YPL Small Grants Program, which is funded by the U.S. Department of State, New Zealand Embassy. The Small Grants Program is a great opportunity for alumni of the Young Pacific Leaders Program to apply for small grant funding for a project they want to implement within the 4 pillars of YPL. For those of you who may not know, there have been 6 YPL conferences so far, starting all the way back in 2013, when previously it was known as the Young Leaders of the Pacific. In order to apply for the YPL Small Grants Program, one of the core team members for your project must be a YPL alumni. That's why we reference the different conferences, is so that you know that you have to have one YPL alumni on your core team. So moving into that, to help all of you prepare for the Small Grants Program and getting your proposals ready, Cultural Vistas is hosting a series of webinars to provide additional information in order to help teams with their project proposal. The first webinar took place last week on Tuesday, March 26th, and was focused on developing and submitting a grant proposal. This second webinar is intended to help interested teams better understand the roles of each core team member and also provide a few tips for you to consider while you're organizing your project. So with that, we'll hop right in. On the screen right now, you should be seeing a program timeline. This is really just to help outline for you the upcoming webinar dates and also the relevant program dates. You'll see we have another webinar next week, which will be focused on budgeting. Yay! I know many of you have questions about budgeting, so that will be a great one to tune into. We'll be able to answer those then. That webinar is scheduled for the 9th of April at 9 a.m. New Zealand time. I will note that daylight savings time for New Zealand is happening this weekend, so just make sure that you have the right time for your specific time zone when tuning in. So we'll still be pegged to 9 a.m. New Zealand time, so just double check that it's the right time for your specific time zone based on the New Zealand time zone. Also, a really, really important date on this slide is the application deadline. That deadline is the 18th of April 2019 at 11:59 p.m. New Zealand time. Awesome. So again, this is a great reference for all of those programmatic deadlines as well as when to expect notification about the project proposal and the implementation period. So today we are going to talk about the core team members. This is the motor, the full power behind the project. I know many of you have heard us say this multiple times, but it is required that each team have a project leader, treasurer, and secretary. These members will be deemed the core team members. Not only will this help make your proposal stronger, but it will also help designate specific tasks within your project proposal to the different roles. Just as a reminder, you'll see on the screen, to submit a proposal, the team must meet the following requirements. At least one core team member must be a former YPL conference attendee. All core team members must be between the ages of 20 and 35 and possess citizenship from a YPL member country. U.S. citizens must demonstrate that their project is regionally focused outside of the United States or be a part of a cross-country team. Projects must address at least one of the following themes, which are education, environment and resource management, civic leadership, and economic and social development. And then lastly, 2018 YPL Small Grant Program core team members are ineligible to reapply for this year. Like I mentioned, in order for your proposal to be eligible for funding, one of the core team members is required to be a YPL alumni, meaning that they have had to attend previously a YPL conference. This being said, not all core team members have to be alumni, just one member. All team members, however, can be. There are no restrictions on that. So if you want all 3 core team members to be YPL alumni, that's totally fine. We just ask that at least one of them, one of the core team members, is an alumni. As you put together your project proposals, especially your teams, when you're putting together your teams, it is so important to understand the roles and responsibilities as well as the requirements of each specific core team member. Starting with the project leader. The project leader is the person who holds overall responsibility for the successful initiation, planning, design, execution, monitoring, and the closure of the grant program or project. The project leader is the head of the implementation of the project and will help to delineate responsibilities to other members of the project, especially the other core team members. This leader should help to guide the discussion and communication amongst the team, as well as the different phases of the project as it is developed and implemented. The project leader is the go-to person for the project and will need to be the most flexible of the 3 core team members, as they may need to step in at certain times to help ensure all phases of the project are moving in accordance with the work plan that was submitted. As the project leader, you are also the leader of those supporting and working on the project. You must really think about and set clear, achievable goals for your project and help to set them for your team as a whole as well. It's very important for your team to work collaboratively together towards the project's goals, with each core member having their set specific goal and respective responsibilities within the project. As the core team, and more specifically the project leader, you really must try to build a team that works together with common aims, all working towards the same final goal of your project. Excuse me. One of the biggest pieces of the project leader's role is clear and open communication. I cannot say this enough. You'll hear me say this about 20 more times on this webinar and throughout the different pieces of the small grant program. As projects are being developed, selected, and implemented, clear communication is key to ensuring the success of the project. It is important that the core team operate harmoniously, as the project can only be successful with the work of all members in their respective roles. Often, the project leader is the guide and force behind ensuring open communication among team members is present. Another level of communication required of the project leader is to the funder or overall grant program manager. In this case, that will be Cultural Vistas, myself. Project leaders are expected to keep us up to date on major project updates and issues, as well as provide project-related information as needed or requested. This is really important because throughout any grant that you work on, you are always in constant communication with your grants officer, and so we do mimic that with the small grants program. This is something that we really focus on is that we are receiving a lot of the information, and that line of communication is open from the project team to us as well. Now on to the treasurer. The project treasurer will handle all of the finances of the program, this including the receiving of the grant funds, budget tracking, budget management, and providing budget updates. The treasurer, most importantly, should be able to receive fund transfers to their bank account from a U.S. bank account because it is required that upon awarding of the project selection, the project treasurer will need to provide their banking information in order for Cultural Vistas to start the tranche and transfers of funds to be dispersed to you all for the project implementation. Throughout the implementation period, the treasurer will also be instrumental in the project budgeting and tracking in order to ensure the expenses are in line with the approved budget that was submitted through the proposal. The project treasurer should also continue to keep track of the funds and expenses as well as an organized system for logging receipts of related project purchases throughout the full project implementation period. So lots of tracking, lots of making sure that you're in line with your approved budget. It's really, really important that this person is trustworthy, organized, and reliable. Funds will be distributed in 3 separate intervals or tranches, excuse me, as we say. First, I need to learn how to pronounce it. Throughout the program. So that's 3 different times we'll be sending money to the treasurer. And that is in specific percentages. So at the beginning of the program, the treasurer will receive 60% of the approved funds. In the middle, corresponding with the midterm report, 35% of the funds will be dispersed. And then at the end, the remaining 5% will be sent. So again, this person really, really has to be trustworthy and organized and have a bank account to receive the funds, as well as they have to be very prepared to track expenses and keep an organized log of program receipts and expenses. Last but certainly not least, in terms of core team members, we have the project secretary. The project secretary is responsible for compiling all monthly reports, the midterm report, and the final report, as well as submitting them with the provided instructions from Cultural Vistas. This person is also responsible for tracking and providing updates on the project. Another aspect of the project secretary's role will be to handle the communications, such as project narratives, photo documentation, and social media engagement. The person in this role will also communicate with Cultural Vistas often. Failure to provide the up-to-date information on the status of a project and the required reports in a timely fashion could result in the loss of funding for the project. So this person is really the key person in terms of the reports that Cultural Vistas requests that to be submitted. So we have monthly reports as well as a midterm and final report, and those selected projects will receive much more information on those reports, but for today's purposes, the project secretary is the one that would be compiling and submitting those reports. As a whole, it's important to remember that while you are putting together the project proposal, it's really important to consider your team and the responsibilities associated with each role, as well as the skills and the time commitment needed to fulfill them. A synchronized and reliable team helps to ensure smooth and successful project implementation. It also helps to provide a strong support system for the project in helping to reach the set out goals. So it's really important that these core team members are committed to the project because it's the project's main support system and kind of the engine behind the project, if you will. In all of the roles and within the team, it's also really important to maintain clear and open communication. Each core team member should ensure that the other core team members know what is going on with the project, especially when it comes to project objectives, delays, or issues, as it will affect all three core team members and their responsibilities that they are required to fulfill within the project. Now that you know more about each role and the responsibilities associated with that role, here are some other things to consider while putting together your team outside of the above mentioned information. So, as you think about your proposal, think about the methods of communication that are preferred. What methods work best for those who are taking on the core team member roles? Additionally, it is important to think about what other team capacity you will need. For example, if you are planning an exchange program or workshop type project, you may need volunteers. What does that look like? Spelling out who will be responsible for those types of project pieces is important when you're thinking about your project proposal as well. This is, on top of clear communication, one of the most important pieces I would say to think about while you're planning your core team: scheduling and time commitment. While 6 months is not a long time in terms of project implementation, and it's important to keep that in mind while you're thinking about the scale of your project, 6 months can be a long time in terms of commitment of team members. This meaning the commitment of team members, especially those balancing work and school commitments on top of the project. It's imperative that those signing onto the project are able to commit the time needed to implement and fulfill the project fully, including the project requirements throughout the program's entirety. Of those requirements, larger time commitments in regard to overall Cultural Vistas programming are specifically the next few slides. So I see that we've got a few questions coming in, and I mentioned earlier in the beginning, as we go along, what I'll do at the end is go through them all, just so we can make sure we're within the time and give you all a chance to ask even more questions at the end as well. So you see here on the slide, one of the requirements is the kickoff workshop. In this small grant program, in order to help the selected projects/teams that are selected digest the information, because there is quite a bit of it, as well as understand the different requirements further and have the opportunity to refine their projects while making final adjustments and getting feedback. All three core team members are required to attend a kickoff workshop hosted by Cultural Vistas in Auckland, New Zealand during the dates the 24th through the 27th of June 2019. These dates are inclusive of travel. I will note that this is dependent on where the participants are coming from, as some may need to arrive earlier or depart later based on their country of origin. All programming for this kickoff and expenses associated with the workshop will be covered by Cultural Vistas. No need to budget for this in your project proposal. The other program requirement, and this is just specifically for the project leader, is the program debriefing seminar. At the conclusion of the program in January 2020, I know that seems like it's a ways off, but we are thinking about that, and we will host a debriefing then. So we'll have a debriefing seminar that will be held over the same amount of days as the kickoff workshop, inclusive of travel, pending the country of origin for those traveling, where the project leader will be asked to represent the project and share the successes, challenges, and highlights, etc., of the past 6 months. This is, again, only a requirement for the project team leader. All of the programming, just to reiterate one more time, for this workshop, the kickoff workshop and the debriefing seminar will be covered and planned by Cultural Vistas. No extra lifting on the project teams that are selected. Before we move on, I just kind of wanted to share with you a few final things to think about as you're putting together your team. I will say that this was a piece that we have received immense feedback on from previous years' grantees, and that they wish that they would have really, really looked at and thought thoroughly about their core team members and the different responsibilities, whether if it was someone whose skills fit differently in another role or someone didn't just have the time commitment. So I really want to and encourage you to put a great deal of thought into your project team members and be sure that every one of them understands the commitment that they're making. Another one is just a side note for those proposals that are planning a project across countries. We do encourage cross-country collaboration. We think it's awesome and really cool that you all would have the chance to work together. But do want to note that you should keep in mind for those team members the differing time zones, currencies, the different cultural heritage pieces, and the preferred and accessible methods of communication for those members across countries. So just making sure that you keep that in mind as you start to agree on the different ways in which you'll communicate, but also the implementation period of the project if selected. So just as a reminder, most of the information that we've discussed, obviously the webinars are much more in depth, so I encourage you to watch them or join us during the live versions. But the majority of the information on the team and other requirements as well as, frequently asked questions can all be found at the link on your screen now. So that's culturalvistas.org/YPL. This is also where you can find access to the application. And we do have a PDF application available upon request for those who need access to that as well. So now that you have a better idea of the roles and project requirements that we touched upon last week, we also wanted to provide you with a few other things to think about as you're organizing your project. So the first two webinars of our 4 webinar series are focused really on looking at putting the project together and making sure that all of those pieces are in place. And then the remaining two, the third will be about budgeting. And then the final one will be a chance for you to have one last overview of the application and ask any questions you may have. So here are some other items to consider. Some things that we found helpful is that in order to ensure that you have a clarified processes and activities that will lead the project's output and deliverables while thinking through your work plan, really look through each step of your project and also the different roles that your core team members will be executing. So really look through all those things and approach it holistically. It's also helpful to develop a work plan that provides you with information that helps to enable your team to estimate properly for budgets and also resources that you may need throughout, as well as to define your project goals. This will be really helpful to you in order to visualize the entire project and, like I mentioned earlier, see it holistically, as well as to see the interdependencies between the project responsibilities and the project team roles. This will also help to show the task breakdown across core team members and those other supporting team members that you may identify, as well as how to forecast your resource requirements within the funding disbursement timeline. So we'll talk about this in a lot more in depth next week in terms of funds and budgeting. But as you're working on your work plan, since this connects to it, it's important to note the funding disbursement schedule. So at the beginning of the program, the treasurer will receive 60% of the funds, in the middle, 35%, and at the end, 5%. And so it's really important to make note of this because that will help you plan what you're able to purchase and or provide at the different stages or phases of your project. So keeping that timing in mind as well. Additionally, thinking about how you'll be tracking the project pieces and what methods work best for your team is very helpful when it comes to reporting, especially for our project secretaries. So as you're kind of putting your project work plan together, thinking about these pieces as well. On that, another thing we encourage you to think through is the different monitoring and evaluation methods for tracking your project's progress. How will you indicate and measure the achieved milestones of your project? What does that look like for your team? We have two more important pieces and then we should be able to jump into questions. So one other thing that I like to encourage you to think about is what your plan for longer term sustainability is. I know we talked a lot about this last week, um, but what does that look like? And as well, if you are thinking about that, do you need some sort of public facing communication strategy? Social media works really well for this. So I encourage you to think about what your communication plan is for your proposed project. Last and certainly not least, do you have a backup plan? What are your contingencies for your project? If yes, what resources would you need? So again, we'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of funding and budgets next week. But thinking through if plan A and plan B doesn't go as according to plan with your project proposal, what's plan C? So looking at those different pieces as you're thinking through your proposal and putting your project together. It's important to not only think about the required pieces of the project proposal like we talked about last week, but additionally those pieces that will occur after the implementation begins and that will help your project reach success. We mention this now because the proposal is really setting the scene for the project implementation period. What you propose is what your project will be when it's, if or when it's selected. And that's kind of how you have to think about it, is that you have to make sure that it's realistic and also you have all of these different pieces as you're submitting the project proposal. And a lot of the workshop in terms of the kickoff that we'll do is make sure that everyone has thought through those, but we really encourage you to think through it beforehand as it demonstrates a really, really strong proposal and project. Okay, so now we will move into questions. So you'll see the contact information on the slide. That's the best place to send questions after the webinar. Before we jump into live questions, I wanted to address the questions we've received to our inbox thus far. And this is primarily regarding the participation of those planning to submit a proposal as a U.S. citizen from a U.S. affiliated state or territory. I know we have quite a few of you online, and many of you have submitted really great questions. And we are working on a more specific guidance, specifically from the U.S. Department of State regarding those answers. Stay tuned. I promise we are working on that information and I will get it to you all as soon as possible. We'll be sure to get those information, or excuse me, those answers and that information for you, not to worry. So we appreciate your patience on that. Okay, so I'll go ahead now and look through the questions we've had come in so far. And also just know that we're open to more questions. One note that if your question relates to budget, feel free to send it through either in the chat or to our inbox, but we'll be doing a webinar focused solely on budgeting next week, and we'll be sure to answer those at that time. All right, let's see. So our first question is, rather than using the project treasurer's personal bank account, would it be okay for us to open a bank account specifically for the project? That is totally okay. We don't mind if that is preferred, but the project treasurer will be responsible for that. We have a question from Laura. So that first question was from Petty. Our second question is from Laura. Are you allowed to be on more than one core team? So no, you are only allowed to be on one core team and on one project. So only one. Sorry, I appreciate everyone's enthusiasm and passion for making a difference in the region, but unfortunately we're just only able to let you be on one core team and one project. Our next question is from Swung. Are purchases, for example, seedlings, preferable from Pacific Islands or okay from U.S. mainland? So we'll talk a lot more about this next week, but we try as best as possible to keep things from Pacific Islands, but there is some flexibility in terms of resources from the U.S. mainland. And then another question from Suong is there a requirement to have 3 members, 1 or 2 person team okay? So it is a requirement to have 3 core team members. You have to have the project leader, the project team, or excuse me, the project treasurer, and the project secretary. So project leader, project treasurer, and project secretary are required. Looks like we have a few more questions coming in. So Meitaka's question was, what happens if some members are unable to travel to the workshop? So this is decided on a case-by-case basis and is decided once the proposal is submitted. It is preferred, and we really, really stress the requirement of having all 3 team members at the kickoff workshop, just because we do a lot of um, work together as a team on your projects. And so it's very, very helpful and really imperative to have all 3 core team members present at the kickoff workshop. So again, this is case by case. If that excuse or the reasoning behind why someone is unable to attend is provided to us, we make those decisions on a case by case basis. Our next question is from Petty. Would it be okay for us to reach out to our YPL alumni to be volunteers, especially for exchange programs and not necessarily core team members? Absolutely. We love when YPL alumni are a part of the project, whether it be from volunteering or attending, helping out at one of the events. You do, again, back to the requirement, you do have to have at least one YPL alumni on the core team. But outside of that, totally, you're welcome to reach out to YPL alumni to be volunteers. So it looks like for now oh, maybe one more. Nadine. Hi, Nadine. We did get your email, and I have a follow-up drafted to you. First, just emphasizing on the first piece in terms of those questions related to American territories and states. We'll be getting further guidance on that. And then with the budget questions, we'll be addressing those in the webinar next week. No need to post. We have it. Thank you so much. And we are catching up on our, no worries, no worries at all. We're catching up on our inbox at the moment. We've had a lot of great questions, and we want to make sure we get you all the right answers. So we'll be sure to be in touch with you. As many of you know, Courtney and I were both traveling, so next week, or excuse me, last week was a bit of a catch-up week for us. But this week, we are fully in office and making sure that we'll get those answers to you. No problem. Okay, we have one more question from Swong. And age for all 3 team members is 25 to 35 during the 6-month period. So actually, it's 20 to 35. And if they're 35, if they're turning 35 within the 6-month period, or they're turning 36 within the 6-month period, that's okay as long as at the start they're 35. And the lowest age is or excuse me, the age minimum is actually 20. This being because there was not an age requirement on YPL at the very, very beginning of the program that was implemented later on. And so we do have some younger alumni that are eligible to apply. So again, that age range is 20 to 35. Great. Well, it looks like we've had a lot of questions come in via the chat, and it's kind of stalled for the moment. If you think of anything else, feel free to throw them into the chat box. We did receive quite a few questions to the inbox, and for all those relevant, excuse me, to today's session, I'll go ahead and just recite those and answer them for you so you have that information. Sometimes it's helpful to hear what other people are asking. Oh yeah, no problem. Go ahead, Ayla. Oh, and we had one more question. Sorry, Swang. I just saw your question. You are able to work with cousins or siblings. We have had many, excuse me, sibling teams in the past, whereas one of our YPL alumni was the project leader and her sister was the treasurer. So Ayla's question is, can a mentor be a part of the core team this year? Absolutely. So alumni mentors from the conference are eligible to be a part of the core team as well, as long as they did not participate in a 2018 small grants program or project, excuse me. So if they weren't a grantee of 2018, they're eligible. No problem. You guys have awesome questions. I appreciate it. So on the topic of more awesome questions, I'll go ahead and just share with you the questions that we've received to our inbox in the case that it's helpful, along with the answers to those questions. So one of the questions we've got a lot of inquiries about is, are we allowed to use or partner with an outside standing organization? Yes, you are able to partner with an outside organization on your project. In terms of funding, they would be able to cost share on your project. We do encourage collaborating with any stakeholder that makes your project a successful project, but do be mindful of the parameters, specifically with the finance piece. Are there rules regarding collaboration with government? That is totally okay as long as it is tied to the YPL theme of civic leadership. We also just kind of want to alert you to be careful to make sure that the project is not funding any government agencies or political activities through that engagement. Can the grant be used to create a service that would be crucial to the social economic development of the region? Absolutely. Providing a service to your community would definitely be eligible for funding. We have a question. Can all three core team members be YPL 2019 YPL alumni? For sure. Again, the requirement is that it only has to be one, but it is acceptable for all to be alumni as well, and they can all be from the same year. They can be from different years. We really don't have a preference on that. So in our application, we ask for the person applying to describe the team's previous involvement with the YPL program. What does that mean is the question. This is the section where you need to indicate your participation in YPL programs, most often sharing what YPL conference that your YPL alumni attended. So this is more specifically with logistical or background information required from the core team members. One or more of my core team members have both expired passports. Is it possible to submit their current expired passport in the application and send a renewed passport once it is obtained? Yes. However, please just note this in your application. If selected, we will need the renewed and obtained passport by the acceptance of the selection of the project. So yes, we would need the updated passport if selected, and this would have to be done. This is a requirement for the program. Will there be a specific quota for the 4 YPL themes to be represented? No, we are totally open and want to have representation, excuse me, of all of the themes, but the other application criteria are most important. So make sure that your project is touching on one of the themes, but you're welcome to touch on multiple of the themes. So that was the majority of the questions that we have in our inbox outside of those that have come through about the U.S. territories and states and budget questions. So those budget questions we'll be sure to touch on next week, and we'll be sure to get you all the more specific guidelines on the territories and states questions as well. Do we have any more questions for those, or excuse me, from those that are live with us today? No worries. If not, for those of you who have questions that may come up after the conclusion of the webinar or as you're reviewing the recording, feel free to go ahead and send them to yplgrants@culturalvistas.org. We'll be sure to address them in the following week's webinar as well as via email. I do want to mention, don't forget to tune in next week for the third webinar, Budget Creation and Project Management. That will be hosted live at the same time, same place, 9 a.m. New Zealand time on Tuesday, the 9th of April. So don't forget that's next week. So to answer Suang's question, what time will you start DC time next week? So as I mentioned earlier on, New Zealand is experiencing daylight savings time this weekend. So be sure to look at what time that means for your respective time zone. For us here in DC, we will actually be starting at 5 p.m. next week. So it's 4 o'clock, or it's right now it's 4:43 p.m. in DC. We'll actually be starting at 5 next week because of the time change. Again, it'll be the same link, same login information. One last thing, hopefully pending technology's cooperation, the recording from today and last week will be posted on the YPL webpage by Thursday this week, New Zealand time. Thanks so much for your patience on this. We've experienced a little bit of technical difficulties on the back end of our site. Yeah, no problem. Petty, if you want to go ahead and just send an email, um, I'll see if we can put it up on our site, and if not, what I will ask, or if easier, just send us an email and I'll send the PowerPoint template to you as well. Anytime, anytime. It's so great to speak with all of you today. I hope you have a superb week. And again, if questions come up, don't hesitate to reach out. We will do our best to get the answers to you. We hope that you just all have an awesome day or an end of the day wherever you are.